Hello, everybody, and welcome. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Blind Hams Tech Zoom for February 2024. This is a meeting that takes place for blind hams or people who just want to learn a thing or two here on Zoom. So it's like a net, but instead of on the air, it's as if we were doing a virtual club meeting. And this is all where we talk about anything related to ham radio, of course, from a blindness perspective. So if you want to learn more about us, you can go to www.blindhams.com. That is our website. And you can find all kinds of neat features, information pages, and of course, the link to this Techzoom is always there right in the front. So you can always come back and keep visiting us every month. Or if you're listening at home and you want to join us on the next month's meeting, well, now you know how to get a hold of us. So without further ado, I'll go ahead and introduce the fellow crew members here and just check in and see how we're doing. Joel, how's it going? W0CAS.
Going great, Julian. Looking forward to the Tech Zoom tonight. And I want to thank everybody for coming. And it's going to be very exciting learning about the mystery antenna.
Yeah, I know. I'm looking forward to that too. It's like, what is this thing going to be? Robert, NC5R, how are things in Texas?
Good evening, Julian. Hello, everybody. Things are fine here. It's been quite a week for me. I got a new Kenwood THD 75, which is the most accessible Kenwood radio I've ever seen, and a new guitar. So, wow, it's like Christmas in February for me. So I'm having fun and looking forward to the mystery antenna being resolved as well. Back to you, Julian.
All right. Well, a radio and a musical instrument. Any way you're making good sound waves. So very cool. And I don't know if Steve is with us. I have not heard him. Steve WB2KTV with us?
I don't see him online.
Guess not. All right, and Angela's in the background, making everything happen here. You happen to be near a mic?
Yeah, welcome aboard, everybody. This is going to be great.
All right, and then we're down to me. My name is Julian, N1CA. I live in Southern California, and it's been interesting times for me here. We've had all kinds of rain and storms going on. My Skywarn Plus on my clear note has never been this talkative. It's very seldom, especially here where I live, to have that many warnings and alerts and things, but we certainly have it. And we got a lot of rain. So I, just like Robert, also got my THD 75, and I'm very impressed with this thing. It is certainly not disappointed. It's really neat to buy something from a mainstream manufacturer in the ham radio world and be able to take it out of the box for the first time and not have to install anything to it or not have to ask anybody to help me get it started. I mean, right from the start, took the thing out, pushed the necessary buttons to get the voice going, and set up my radio all independently. That is a wonderful thing. And I'm very happy about it. And again, as I said previously on the subject, I really hope that the other manufacturers like Yaesu and ICOM and everybody else takes note of this and starts following suit, because we need to be included in all this fun stuff as well. And we shouldn't have to jump through extra hoops or pay extra or whatever to get this level of accessibility that's available to everybody, as Kenwood has clearly demonstrated. So, getting back to podcast, or back to our meeting here, I want to take a moment to talk about the blindhams.com website, as I did earlier, as well as our YouTube channel and podcast. The YouTube channel particularly, if you haven't subscribed to us yet, please find us on YouTube. Please subscribe and like us and follow us. The more subscribers and the more watches we get, we actually get monetization, and that money goes directly toward a fund that we use to buy radios, accessible radios for blind hams out there that need it, especially ones that are new to the hobby. So it's going to a good cause, and you're going to learn quite a lot. And by the way, it doesn't matter if you're blind or sighted. anybody can enjoy and learn from our content. It's really well done. It's very well narrated, especially because it's done for blind people. So there's really no downside to it. We hope that many of you listening at home have, if you haven't done so, please go and check us out on YouTube and subscribe to us, like us, and follow us.
You want a minute?
So, Joe, real quick, while you're here, do you have any update on stats or anything like that on what I just mentioned?
Yeah, just a little bit. We got about 1,500 views this month, and over, I think it's 5,000 watch minutes, and 18 new subscribers. We're bumping up almost to 700 subscribers, which I would never believed that we'd had that kind of level of participation. This just goes to show you that we have a lot of sighted friends and family that are subscribed to our YouTube channel, and keep up the good work. Once we hit that 3,000 watch hours within a 365-day period, we will be able to monetize. Right now, we're about 1,700, so we're over halfway. We just need people to watch as many hours of our content. We've got over 118 videos up, and we put 118 podcasts out also. So we just had a great podcast thanks to Robert NC5R, who demonstrated installing Skywarn Plus on clear nodes, and did a very good job, Rob. We appreciate that. I think someone is still unmuted. If you wouldn't mind muted, I hear a screen reader in the background, so that might help our presenter here if somebody can help mute that. And back to you, Julian.
All righty, thanks. And again, staying muted is very helpful. Like Joel said, it just keeps things clean. And we will open a period of discussion, and at that point, you can unmute yourself. But in the meantime, I'm still hearing Jaws talking. So please, if you can, mute yourself. And if we mute you, stay muted until we open the floor for interaction. All right, well, thanks, Joel. That's really neat stuff. And again, I just want to urge everybody out there, if you haven't done it already, go find us, go subscribe, follow, watch, take in our content, use your social media to spread the news about our content, because it's all going to go to help a good cause. And again, a lot of good learning will come from it, whether you're blind or sighted alike. There's a lot to learn from consuming our content. So, without further ado, we're going to go ahead and turn the floor here to Allan KF0FUL. He is going to give us a very interesting presentation, and one that a lot of us have been anticipating since we've heard mention of it, a mystery antenna. And from what I understand, the only clue that was given is that this is something that most of us probably have in our house or near us somehow, and it can be used to be a ham radio antenna. So I'm looking forward to this. Go ahead, Allan. The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Julian, and thank you to the Blind Hams for inviting me back. This will be the second time I've given a presentation for Blind Hams, and I've enjoyed all of your friendship over the past few years. I'm, proud to call most of you friend, and I'm sure there's some new friends here this evening. But before I close it down, and we'll have a period at the end for questions. But before we get there, so we've been kind of teasing this up for the last few weeks, and it's all about this mystery antenna that I put together back in December, and I'll explain how I got there because there's kind of a story behind it. I love telling stories, so we'll tell the story of how this mystery antenna came to be. But as we've teased before, it's something that most folks have in their home and can be fashioned into an antenna. But I want to open up the floor just for a minute, and a number of you know exactly what this is, so you don't guess. But for the people who haven't been involved, I'll open the floor. Does anybody have any guesses? This is an item that most people have in their home that can be used to build an HF antenna out of. Any guesses?
Maybe hangers, clothes hangers.
Okay, that's a good guess, but not correct. That was Rob Turner. Anyone else? Jim?
A slinky toy.
That's another great guess, but no, it is not a slinky. Any other guesses? I'll give one more guess. And no one wants to. Oh, one more.
Yeah. Downspouts and gutters.
No, that's another good guess, and I'll talk about that later. But nope, that is it's not a gutter, not a rain gutter.
I did that in the dormitory once.
Okay, works great. Okay, well, okay, so the suspense is over. So what we're talking about here is a ladder, a step ladder. And so we'll talk a little bit about that, but it was a step ladder. But before I get in too deep, a little bit for the folks that don't know me, a little bit of personal and professional, about me. My call sign is KF0FUL. My name is Allan Smith. I'm originally from Denver, Colorado, but I live in Wichita, Kansas now. We've lived here, my wife and I, for about, this will be 29 years. I have a Bachelor of Science degree in aeronautical engineering that I did back in the mid to late 1980s. I also have been a commercial pilot for 41 years, although I don't do much flying anymore. And I've worked in the field of flight test for over 35 years. Presently, I'm a flight test engineer at Bombardier Flight Test Center. I've been there for 29 years. We're based here in Wichita at a little company you might have heard of called Learjet. And I've been here for 29 years doing certification development flight test. And I've worked on a large number of civilian and military aircraft over my career. And I've got a list on here for the sighted folks. I'm not going to read through it, but I've been doing this an awful long time, and it's sort of my life's work. So that's a little bit about me professionally. But who am I on the amateur radio side of things? So going way back to the late 1970s, I started working on my novice license back then. But then I got interested in flying, and I started flying, learning how to fly. And I got so much radio exposure just flying that I kind of gave up on the novice, and that went on hold. Fast forward 40 years into the future, and sometime during the early phases of COVID back in 2021, for fun, I purchased an RTL SDR dongle and started fashioning some homemade antennas out in the backyard, and started listening to some HF broadcasts and some VHF broadcasts of local repeaters and simplex that were going on here around the Wichita area. And it got me interested again. I thought, wow, I had forgotten how much I really like radio. And so I went out and I took an online technician exam because you can do that now. Of course, back in the old days, you had to get a book and all of that. But nowadays, everything's on the computer. So I took an online test just to see how hard the test had been. And I passed it on the first try. Of course, my engineering knowledge probably helped out significantly with that. Well, that was the practice test. 2 weeks later, I had my technician license, and I tend to jump into things. So that was June of 2021. And then by October, I had gotten my general and my amateur extra. So I'm an amateur extra now. And that's kind of the story of how I got back into ham radio. And ever since then, I've just been having a ball. I am a technology enthusiast, which most of the people in the FCC will know. Anything dealing with technology, not just radio, I'm into it. So that's a little bit about me. Now let's get back to the subject at hand. So our agenda for this evening, we'll talk a little bit about the inspiration for this particular antenna project, which is an interesting one and topical. And then we'll talk about, what exactly is a ladder antenna? How does it work? What materials did I use, which weren't very many, and how I put it together, how we connect it to the radio, and then we'll have a little bit of discussion on performance. So I've got some SWR plots. I've got some maps of QSOs that I conducted, both digital and sideband. Some discussion on ways that we could improve this antenna, although I don't think it needs much improving. And then kind of some final conclusions, and then I'll open it up for questions. So let's dive right in. How did I end up building an antenna out of a ladder? Well, let's talk about some actual events that actually kind of got me thinking down these lines. Back on December 9th of 2023, an F3 tornado moved through Clarksville, Tennessee. This tornado killed 3 people. It destroyed 114 homes and it damaged almost 900 more. A very good friend of mine who is here tonight, Mark Lemons, WB6BJN, most of you know him. He suffered no damage to his home, luckily, or very little, but he did lose all of his outside antennas due to storm damage. His next door neighbor's house was actually knocked off its foundation. And as I recall, Mark told us that the kids who were in that house had to crawl out through a window because they couldn't get out through the front door. It was jammed. And they came over to Mark's house to seek refuge in the storm. But they didn't get hurt. So it took several weeks for Mark to get help because of the damage zone. And for those sighted folks, I've got some photographs of some of the storm damage there in the town of Clarksville. And so it took Mark a while to get back on the air. And that got me thinking, you know, what would we do if we had a situation like this and we needed to get a quick and dirty antenna up and just be able to get on the air in an emergency situation? So I started thinking, well, what metal objects do we have around our house? And I thought, well, wow, a ladder, that'd probably work. And so that was sort of the inspiration. I've got another page here again for the sighted folks. And this shows some of the actual damage in Mark's backyard. So he's kind of has a fence, and he had had some folks help him fashion up a section of top rail, and he had a long wire antenna going on that. You can see that the fence kind of was destroyed, and this top rail in the right-hand photograph is bent over at a pretty good angle. So that kind of took him off the air. And again, that was the impetus for this particular project. So moving on. Okay, so what exactly is a ladder antenna? What is it? Well, it's similar in design to any end-fed or random wire antenna. It works on multiple bands, better with an external tuner, but you'll find out through some of the SWR plots that you could actually get away without an external tuner on most of the bands here. I was pretty surprised at that. For this particular project, I used a step ladder. The particular one that I have is made by a company called Gorilla Ladders, and it's pretty stout, but it's one of these ladders that can act as either an extension ladder if it's extended all the way, and this particular ladder would be 18 feet long if it were extended straight out, or you can bend it over in like an A-frame, and then it would be a 9-foot sort of what I'd call a step ladder. So you could use it either way, but that was the ladder that I used. I utilized a 9-to-1 Allans with no ground, no radials, or dedicated counterpoise connection. And for those of you who've known me for a while, this is kind of a very common way that I build a lot of experimental antennas, with a 9-to-1 Allans, and I typically don't use a dedicated counterpoise. In place of the counterpoise, I'll use typically I use about a 50-foot run of RG8X coax cable for the connection between the Allans and the antenna tuner, and that acts as a counterpoise. So with an antenna in this frequency range, if you're using coax as your means of connection, and you've got at least 25-30 feet of coax, that coax shield will radiate and act as a counterpoise. So this is the way that I use most of my antennas. And if you've got, as I say, if you have at least 25-30 feet, I've got 50, that RF will radiate and it won't come back into the shack. Moving on. So the materials I used are very few. I've got a photograph up here of an LDG 9-to-1 Allans. These can be purchased from a number of places. I buy mine from HRO, and they cost $29.95. They're pretty cheap. And then I have because I build a lot of these types of experimental antennas, I've built a little pigtail that's got a banana plug on one end and an automotive grounding clip on the other end. And basically all I need to do is plug that antenna plug into the positive side of the Allans, and then I can clip the grounding thing to anything that's made of metal, and I've got an antenna. And then for those of you who are sighted, I've got a page here. This is the page off of HRO, where you can buy it. But again, they're $29.95, $30 essentially. If you're want to ever do this, I would highly recommend buying one of these. You can use them over and over and over, and they're great fun. And then the ladder itself, I've got a photograph here standing out in the front yard here. It's just basically an aluminum ladder, and it acts similar to an end-fed antenna. And for those sighted folks, you can see down in the sort of lower left-hand portion of the antenna, you can see the unun that I've just got rubber banded to the antenna. And somewhere in here, I think I've got a close-up of where it connects. But basically, I just connect the grounding strap to any portion. There's a little rail that comes across one of the ladder steps, and I've just connected the grounding strap to that, and that's it. It's as simple as that. You literally can set this thing up in under a minute. Okay, there on the next page, I've got a close-up of what it looks like. So the unun is here, just rubber banded to the side of the antenna just to keep it out of the way. And then the pigtail just goes down and the grounding strap is connected to a cross brace member. The connections are simple, especially for this. So the LDG unun sort of has 3 connections. It's got a positive connection that is where you would connect your antenna. It's got a negative connection where if you had one, you would connect your counterpoise, although I am not using a counterpoise, so that connection is free. And then on the other side of the unun, there's an SO239 connector for coax. So basically, the coax is connected to one side, the positive lead is connected to the ladder cross brace, and the black ground is unconnected. And then from there, basically it goes from the unun, the coax goes to an antenna tuner, in this particular case, an LDG AT200 Pro 2 antenna tuner, which is kind of the one I use in my shack. Although when we get to the SWR plots, you will note that I probably could have gotten away without using this particular antenna tuner because most of the SWRs are below 3:1, which means I could have used my radio's internal tuner. But I like this tuner, so I kept it connected. And then from there, a coax to the radio. So pretty simple connection. Let's talk performance. So I've got a few SWR plots here. I'll kind of talk through them. This first plot for the sighted folks is a plot of all the bands from 80 meters all the way down to 6 meters. And basically, except for 80 meters, all of those, or most of those, as they cross the bands. And again, for the sighted folks, these gray vertical bars indicate where the individual bands are. 80, 60, 40, 30 is really not shown on here. The 20 meter, 17, 15, 12, and 10 meter, and then way at the far right side, the 6 meter. So those gray areas are the bands, and everything in between is just, other areas of the spectrum. But you can see as you look across that all of the bands from pretty much 60 meters on down, all of the SWR except a little portion of the 6 meter, it's all below 3:1. So pretty impressive SWR. And then here I'll walk through briefly the individual SWR plots. So this first one is the 80 meter plot. You can see it goes above, I think the high point here toward the top of the band is just over probably about 4.2 SWR, easily tunable by an external antenna tuner, probably not tunable by your radio's tuner though. But that's 80 meters. And then I'll switch down to 40 meters. You can see here that the SWR is pretty much flat across the band, and it's right about 2.6-ish. Maybe it dips down to 2.5, maybe right in the middle of the band, but this could easily be tuned by an internal tuner on any radio. Moving over to the 20 meter band again, this is like 2.0, just shy of, well, maybe we'll say 2.1 SWR across the band. 17 meters is almost resonant, like 1.05 SWR, pretty much 1-to-1 across the entire band. Really impressive. 15 meters, about 2.7, 2.8 across the band, completely flat. 12 meters, 2.9 across the band, or no, I'm sorry, I take that back. 15 meters is 1.8 across the band. I said 2.8, it's 1.8. 12 meters, about 1.9 across the band. These are really, some of these are so low you wouldn't even need to use a tuner at all. 10 meters, about 2.0, I say, I'm sorry, 1.9 at the lower end of the band and probably like 1.7 at the upper end of the band. So you could almost not use a tuner on that. And then 6 meters, it's below 3 at the lower end of the band, and then above above about 51.5 megahertz, it starts going up. And at the top end of the band at 54 megahertz, it's just above 4-to-1. But again, all of these SWRs would be tunable with an external tuner, most of them tunable with an internal tuner, and several of them you wouldn't need a tuner at all. So I was very impressed at that. I didn't expect that, but it works quite well in practice. So now I'll show you. So the next slide I have here is a slide of the sideband QSO. So I made, let's count them up here. Every one of these is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So there's 9 of these are sideband, and one of them was FT8 because some guy answered me when I didn't want him to. So I've got, 9 or so sideband QSOs. Just about all of these QSOs gave me 5 to 9 signal reports. There's a couple 5.7s, very strong. The pattern is essentially omnidirectional. So I've got one that goes down into Mexico City, Mexico, and then to both coasts, up to Columbia, down to Columbia, South Carolina, Clarksville, Tennessee. Mark, I actually had a contact in Clarksville. It was, let's see, WD4NGB, and I talked to him about you. I don't have that QSO here, but we had a 20-minute QSO, and he knew who you were, and he knew that people were going to help you with your antenna. The longest sideband QSO here was to Portland, Maine at 1,468 miles, which was pretty impressive. We had Montreal, Quebec, Canada. We made it up into Islip Terrace, New York, Lacey, Washington. Of course, we said Mexico City, Saint Jerome, Quebec, Canada, San Clemente, California, and Pioneer, Montana. So those are all except for one sideband. And I'm going to play for you one of the QSOs. So this was a QSO with W2 Tango. It was a special event station in Columbia, South Carolina. So this is an actual QSO on the ladder antenna.
Kilo Foxtrot 0, Foxtrot Uniform Lima, have you 5959 into Wichita, Kansas.
USL now, give me the call again on this site, it's my fault.
Kilo Foxtrot 0, Foxtrot Uniform Lima.
USL, Kilo Foxtrot 0, Foxtrot Uniform Lima, and I have Mr. Allan in Kansas. USL, Allan?
Hey, QSL, and what's my signal report? I have you 59.
59 also in the Sweet Green, South Carolina. Merry Christmas and Happy New Year.
Merry Christmas to you, and thanks for the QSO.
USL 73, this is Whiskey 2 Tango, CQ from anywhere.
So that was an actual QSO on the antenna, and it worked quite well. I was surprised at how well it worked on sideband. So basically able to reach easily the entire continental United States on sideband, and with great results. So moving on, let's see. So another thing that I did, and I hadn't done this before, I went out and I created a couple of well, actually 3 propagation maps, and I'll describe these. So basically what I did was I went and I used FT8, which is a digital mode, and I used the reverse beacon network. So when you transmit on a number of these digital modes like FT8, but not just FT8, you can look at the reverse beacon network, and there are a number of stations out there across the planet, and they're constantly monitoring. And if they monitor you, they will tell you that they heard you, and they will tell you what your signal to noise ratio is. And so this first one that I have demonstrates just how omnidirectional this antenna is. So this one was on 40 meters. The frequency for FT8 on 40 is 7.074 megahertz. And you can see for the sighted folks that I am being heard throughout both coasts, all the way up into Canada, down into the lower tip of Florida, and it's essentially omnidirectional. So all those little dots and lines are stations that heard me, and I don't know how many there are, but there's got to be at least 100 there. So it did very well on 40 meters. But the real surprise was this next one. So on 20 meters, here is the 20-meter QSO chart. And so what we have here is we can see the continental United States, and there's quite a few. It's making it out all the way to both coasts, making it down to Central America, past Cuba into the Virgin Islands, and down into the island chain, up into British Columbia and parts of Canada and Alaska. But the most impressive, and it's also making it to Africa, but the most impressive one here is this one down here in the lower right corner. So this was Reunion Island, which is an island that is out past Madagascar on the other side of Africa from us at 10,430 miles. 10,430 miles. So I made a digital contact with a signal to noise ratio of minus 12 dB. So what does that mean? What is minus 12 dB? Well, what it means is for digital modes like FT8, you can make a really good digital contact. You probably wouldn't do very well on sideband at minus 12 dB, but it's still impressive. And if you had modes like a JS8 call, you could have a keyboard to keyboard conversation that you could last all day at minus 12 dB. So that was very unexpected. But as I say, I also made it into several stations in Africa and the islands, Canary Islands off of Africa, as well as down into Central America. So very impressive. And that was FT8 reverse beacon network on 20 meters. And then I have one last one. So I also, just for fun, tried 17 meters on that particular day, did the reverse beacon network, and I'm hitting down into Central America here. I think it was Belize, up into the northwest of the United States, Washington and Oregon, all that, out to the east towards the East Coast, and and also two stations up in Alaska, up near the Bering the Bering Strait. But the most impressive contacts on this band were, I have two contacts that were in Japan, so making it out the other direction. So very impressive use of digital modes to create this propagation map to see exactly what this antenna is capable of. So let's talk about, if we wanted to, how could we improve it? Although sounds like it's pretty good, doesn't it? Ways that we could improve this design if we utilized a remote tuner in lieu of a tuner. My tuner is like right near the radio. If we used a remote tuner right at the antenna feed point, we could potentially get rid of some inherent losses when you have that tuner at the radio, and you'd be maximizing your RF transfer to the antenna. So that's one thing that you might do. Also, a ground rod or a counterpoise could improve performance. So if you were going to try and use a ground rod, I recommend a 4 to 8 foot ground rod driven down into the proper soil type and then used as a counterpoise. Or if you don't, you could, and I had already talked about 30 foot of coax at least, if you're not using a counterpoise. The other thing you could do in lieu of a counterpoise would be to add ground radials. So if you really wanted to shoot the moon on this, 8 to 16 ground radials connected to the negative side of the UNUN would it definitely improve the ground plane. However, all of that said, the performance of this particular antenna far exceeded my expectations. And I wouldn't even waste time with any of that stuff, right? Because I'm hitting Reunion Island. So, but those are ways that you might improve it. And these methods would improve any end-fed antenna, by the way, any end-fed antenna. So conclusions. Ladder antenna, it's simple to erect. It can be used in place of a primary antenna to get on the air in case of emergency. The other thing, it's self-supporting, low cost, and easy to deploy quickly. The fact that, and people had asked me, why didn't I try and open it up to make it like an extension ladder? Well, the thing of it is, it will operate that way, although I didn't try. I know it will work because I've seen it done. The thing is, if you open it up like an extension ladder, then you need to find a way to support it, right? You need to either lean it up against something or find a way to support it. When you run an antenna like this as an A-frame antenna, it's self-supporting. You just open it up, connect your unun to it, and away you go. So I like the fact that you can deploy it quickly and easily, and it supports itself. The antenna was omnidirectional. You can see that from the propagation maps. Good range was obtained, Portland, Maine, during the short time of testing on sideband. I played around with it for about 4 hours, and excellent DX was seen all the way to Reunion Island using the reverse beacon system and FT8 as a digital mode with a range of about 10,400 miles and a signal to noise ratio of -12 dB. Sideband performance was surprisingly good within the continental US, considering the relatively compact nature of this antenna, reaching both coasts with signal reports of anywhere from 5.7 to 5.9. And I should, just to touch on that again, we can throw out a long wire, anybody can, you can figure out some way of getting a long wire out there. But again, it's a ladder. It's super compact. The thing's only 9 feet high and it doesn't take up a very large footprint. So it does pretty good. In fact, in many ways, it does just as good as my long wire antennas, that are purpose built. It's simple. It requires no building. You just connect the unun and away you go. You're in business. It's cost effective. And then the unun was probably the most expensive part needed. Well, I guess which was $30 unless you want to talk about the ladder. But as I say, most folks have a ladder lying around. As long as it's a metal ladder, it'll work for this. It doesn't mean it doesn't have to be aluminum. It could be steel or whatever. And then, of course, finally, bragging rights, right? I QSO'd with Maine on a ladder. And then I got her 10,000 miles away in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. How cool is that? That's it. But before I open it up to questions, Joel had asked, could I make a listing of other antenna projects that I've done? So I've been doing this type of thing for a couple of years now, have been having a great time of it. And so here are some of the antenna projects that I've done. So the first one, and somebody mentioned it earlier, rain gutter antenna. I did build a rain gutter antenna. And by the way, I have presentations on all of these antennas if anybody ever wants to see one. The rain gutter antenna was lots of fun. That was probably one of the very first ones that I built. And I QSO'd with a station on sideband in Japan on the rain gutter antenna. That's probably my longest experimental antenna sideband contact. And I think I got a 5x7 out of that station. Talked to him for about 10 minutes. So that was cool. The next one, a loop on the ground antenna or log antenna. This is a receive only antenna that I built, and some of the folks in the FCC know about it because we've had a lot of discussions about the log antenna, and that's something we can talk about sometime. Very interesting design. It literally is a piece of wire that lays on the ground, and I've got a photograph here. You can see it just sitting out in the front yard. And it works very well. And Rich has built one of those recently, and he's had some pretty good success, it sounds like. Next up, the water antenna. Water antenna was a lot of fun. This antenna was basically built with some clear vinyl tubing, and then the antenna itself is made of a saline solution of water and salt, simulated seawater salinity level. And basically the saltwater solution is held inside of a vinyl tube. And I built this thing to be kind of like a 20-meter vertical antenna. So I have this thing rubber banded, this tube full of water, rubber banded to a fiberglass mast. Sorry, I was trying to remember what fiberglass mast, and it was about 30 feet high-ish. And basically it connects the exact same way as this ladder antenna does through that 9-to-1 unun. That was an interesting project. Kurt, who is online, helped me with it. The toughest part of that project was getting that vinyl tubing to seal up because it wanted to leak all the time, but made some contacts on that. That was great fun. The Christmas light antenna was a fun one. We did that not this past Christmas, but 2 Christmases ago. And everybody always asks me, does it light up when you transmit? And the answer is absolutely, it lights up. And so that was a lot of fun. And I still actually have that antenna. This past summer, I made a couple of neat ones that I had been wanting to do for a while. I built an antenna out of a farm windmill up near our cabin in northern Colorado, and that worked like a champ. That was fun. And then I built one out of a barbed wire fence that was out in the middle of the forest. And that one, both the windmill and the barbed wire fence antennas had great performance. And then this fall, I made one. Actually, Kurt helped me with this one too, KR0LEX, which was made out of a baseball backstop. So if you can imagine in your mind a baseball backstop, which is, it's kind of like a huge chain link fence, that blocks the ball at the backstop. I found one of these at one of the local high schools, and we hooked up to it, and boy, that thing worked like a champ too. That was a fun one. And I still have yet to make the presentation for that one. I have all the data, but I haven't made the presentation. And then, of course, the ladder antenna. And then I've got some other ideas in the future. And so the one that Kurt and I are working on right now, it's partially done, is an antenna made out of railroad tracks, believe it or not. So we've discovered some unused railroad tracks up in the sort of country type area near where Kurt lives in Valley Center, Kansas. We have to find a way of, stealth using this, but it's a set of abandoned tracks. And we went and took some SWR readings, which were promising. So we'll, at some point, we'll do that one. And then I have some other super secret ones for the future. One of them that will absolutely blow your mind. But I'm not going to talk about that here. We'll save that for the future. But those are some of the projects that Joel had asked me to bring up. And so at this point in time, I'm going to open it up for questions. If anybody has any questions, I'd be happy to entertain them. So let's open it up for any discussion.
Alan, one question. You were running 100 watts, I believe, on this ladder. Is that correct?
That's correct. Typically, I run 100 watts on pretty much all of these antennas. That's the maximum of my radio. And most of these radios, I guess I didn't say, I'm running typically an ICOM 7300 HF radio. It's a 100-watt radio, and then typically I have this LDG AT200 Pro 2 tuner. Most of the time, that's the way I operate when I'm doing POTA operations, and so it works great for this. The ladder antenna, though, I actually used my ICOM 7610 because it was just sitting out in the front yard here. So, but both of those radios would have probably performed similarly. We have any other questions?
The noise level on the ladder.
Oh, not that bad. Comparable. Well, so I have a couple. My antennas here in Wichita are all in the attic. I live in an HOA, so I have a short end-fed antenna up in the attic, and then I've got a longer. It's a Alpha Delta DXCC antenna, which is it's an 80 to 6 meter fan dipole antenna that has 3 elements, also up in the attic, and so I would say that this ladder had comparable noise levels to the fan dipole, if not maybe a little bit better. So the noise levels were very manageable.
I have a question, K1BZ. Alan?
Go ahead, Margaret.
Just so I understand the geography of it, you had the ladder antenna opened up as if you were going to use it as a ladder, And it was sitting on the ground?
That's correct. So sitting in my front yard, for the folks who are sighted, I have a photograph of it now up on the screen. So sitting out in the front yard in what I call A-frame configuration, like a step ladder. So in that configuration, this particular ladder is 9 feet tall. It's an 18-foot extension ladder. So if you open it up, so it's, linear, if you will, not an A-frame, it would be 18
Right.
feet long. So yeah, it's just sitting on the ground.
And how much are you above, well, sea level?
We are about 1,300 feet above sea level here in Wichita. Although I would say that really doesn't matter in this particular case, right? Because we're using skywave. So if you're in the mountains, if you're in the plains, it really doesn't matter as long as you don't have anything blocking your takeoff angle. For HF anyway, if you're using skywave, so it works.
Yeah, it's more about
works well.
average terrain height. If
Yeah.
you're all,
Well, I
all
mean,
the
like
same.
if we go up to our cabin, right? Our cabin is at 9,000 feet MSL, at 9,000 feet above sea level. And here in Wichita, we're at 1,300 feet. And those few thousand feet I mean, it sounds like a lot, but you're talking a few thousand feet, and then you're talking the ionosphere, which is a couple 100,000 feet, right? So it comes out in the wash when you're talking about skywave. Now, if you have like a mountain that's right in front of you blocking a low takeoff angle, that could be an issue, but it doesn't really make much of a difference with HF.
Thank you.
Sure.
This is Jim KY2D. Did you have to do anything about the possible resistance between the connection points of the ladder? You have hinge pins in there, you have the A-frame part, and that stuff can be oxidized and turn into diodes. Did you do anything special to electrically bond it?
No, not really. And just kind of to give you for those of you who are sighted, you can see this thing. It's a pretty shiny antenna, but just to kind of tell you, it's a pretty old antenna. I think I bought this thing over 25 years ago, probably almost 28 years ago. So it just sits out in the garage. It doesn't sit outside. So there's some oxidation and whatnot. What I have found typically, because I build these things out of all kinds of stuff, the baseball backstop antenna, right, is something that's been sitting out there. And I'm sure that backstop has been there longer than I've been in Wichita, and I've been here 29 years. So when I connect it to that, even oxidized metal can, carry a charge. So as long as things are, not too dilapidated, it's not really going to make a difference. And at the end of the day, you're going to tune it up anyway, right? We just tune it up so that we make sure that our radio's happy. And then we see if we're going to be able to, get an RF signal out of it. But most of these types of things, you can use this technique to pretty much get just about anything that's metal to send an RF signal. That's been my experience.
And I did ask Allan when he did this, did the antenna have, or did the ladder have aluminum feet or plastic feet? And he checked, it's got plastic feet. So actually the metal's not touching the ground, is it, Allan?
No, it's not. But you could, when I did the barbed wire antenna, for instance, and when I did that antenna, I went and I tried to find an antenna that had fence posts that were made of wood, right? So they weren't metallic, although some of them are. And so it's kind of a funny thing. You almost kind of have to just go and try it and see if it works. But, if you can, you try and want to, isolate it from ground. And when I say ground, I mean the ground. Seems to work better, but I would not honestly, Joel, be surprised if those plastic feet were not there, because the grass is kind of coming up and it's probably touching the side of the antenna. It worked like a champ. So you just gotta try, see what happens.
And I did a little research today online, and I went to harborfreight.com, and they just happen to have
A bunch of antennas on sale?
They just, yeah, they have antennas. They have something called the Franklin. It's the same type of ladder. It's kind of like the little giant ladders, which is like the Gorilla ladder you have that you can make it an A-frame or an extension. And they have them on sale, I think it was 109. So for 109 and $30, $139, you can have an antenna that the HOA won't recognize.
Well, I'll tell you what, my wife, when we first met in like 1989, and then we met down in Arizona and came up here, we have an old aluminum ladder. It's super lightweight and it's sitting out in the garage, and this thing is just beat to death. It's an old painting ladder, right? So it's got paint splatters and all kinds of junk all over it. That ladder would work just great for that. And we keep that thing around just because it's so lightweight compared to this thing. But it doesn't matter what, I mean, as long as it's a metal ladder, it'll work. And the thing that I did like about this particular antenna was that the day that I was doing the testing, we get a lot of wind up here in Wichita, and it was blowing over 30 miles an hour. And I liked that it was, had a little bit of heft to it, because it's withstood about 25 miles an hour. And then at some point when I was testing, a gust hit it and knocked it over. And I couldn't figure out why, like all of a sudden I wasn't receiving very well. And then I looked out the window and it was, sitting on its side. So I just propped it back up. But, a lighter weight antenna would have been blowing over. I would have had to secure it somehow. So at any rate, but it doesn't matter. If it's a metal antenna, it'll work. Guaranteed.
Well, Allan, this is Mark. Where did you feed the coax? Where on the ladder did you feed that?
Okay, and again, for those who are sighted, I have a photograph of the ladder up here, and if you look down in the lower sort of left corner you'll see an orange item. That is the unun. And Mark, the unun has 3 connections to it. It has a positive connection, which is where the antenna connects. So I have a little grounding, just a little pigtail wire that plugs into it with a banana plug, and it clips on like with a grounding clamp, just simple clamp. That connects to the positive. In this case, I wasn't using a counterpoise, so the negative connection to the unun has nothing connected to it. And then on the other side of the unun, there's an SO239 connector that you just screw in a coax, and that's how the coax connects.
Yeah, Mark, it's down in the bottom left-hand side of, the 2 runs that go up. It's on the bottom of the antenna.
And here, again, for those sighted people, I've got a kind of a blown up version of it here where you can see exactly where the coax connects and all the connections here. But just 3 connections, and I'm only using 2 out of the 3. So it's coax on one side and the banana plug, which, connects to it's just a single wire that goes to a little clamp that I can just clamp onto anything metal. And that's been a really nice way of setting up these antennas. I built that little pigtail last summer, and it's I used to have to jerry rig up some way of connecting, and it took me an extra 5 minutes or whatever, and now I just plug this banana plug in and clamp the clamp to anything metal, and I've got an antenna in 30 seconds. Any other questions?
And speaking of other antennas, I was just curious. One of the water antenna that you, it's hard for me to wrap my head around a water antenna. What was your best contact on a water antenna? Do you remember?
Well, since we're here, I can pull up that presentation here. Let me see if I can find it, because I've created this presentation similar, format for just about all these things. Let me find it here. Where are you, water antenna? And I can tell you exactly where it was. Here it is. Let me open it up. Let's see here. So for the sighted people, I have the water antenna presentation up. I think I have a QSO chart. Okay, so this one, Seattle, Washington, 1,427 miles on sideband, was the farthest one with station K7 Sierra Sierra. Yeah, this one on the particular day, as I recall, Kurt, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but my recollection was the HF was absolutely horrible that day. And then we were fighting with this thing which was leaking continuously. We got it sealed up thanks to Kurt and some two-part epoxy, but it was not my favorite antenna to use, and so I made 4 contacts. Here they are. One was Austin, Texas. One was Alexandria, Louisiana. One was Seattle, Washington, and one was Yuma, Arizona. Interestingly enough, the city that I met my wife in. But I digress. So this one, when I hit Seattle at 1,400 plus miles, I knew that it would work, and I knew if the HF conditions had been better that day, I probably could have hit Japan on it. But so I didn't, and this thing was leaking the whole time we were using it. So that, proof of concept proved, but this was not one that I ever came back to, just because it took us forever to get the water into the tubing. And I could go on for a half hour, with all the pain that was done. For those of the people that are looking here, you can see here's a photograph of when I was trying to seal up. So basically the trick here is, how do you get the signal into the water? So what I did was I got some plumbing, plumbing fixtures, and took a piece of bare wire, ran the wire through the plumbing fixture, and then attached the plumbing fixture to this tube full of water, which was wanting to leak. And so I have a bare wire that's making contact inside of the water solution, and then the wire goes to the unknown. So that was a fun project. It actually worked. Every time I transmitted on it, after I transmitted for about a minute, I would get all kinds of static. And what I think was happening was, I think I was ionizing the water solution when I transmitted. So that was a whole interesting project in and of itself, but it worked. So it was pretty cool.
That's awesome.
Yeah, that was a fun one. That was a fun one. And any other questions?
I think a gentleman asked in the chat, what about tuning up some beer cans? And I was sitting here thinking about that. If you took some of the metal duct tape that they use now, the aluminum duct tape, and you
It's actually been done, Joel.
Stacked a bunch of beer cans up.
That's been done, and I forget if it was Josh Hoshnasi, was somebody. They had, I don't know, he was involved with, I think it was Josh. There was something, it was a couple of years ago, and they had some party somewhere, and they're having people put up temporary antennas and building things out of whatever they want. And they had a contest, and I don't know that it was Josh that did it, but somebody built, basically they used aluminum tape or whatever and connected a bunch of beer cans or together, and they made an antenna, and it worked. Kurt tried this at some point, but he had collected antennas and or beer cans or cans, and went and did that. Kurt, can you maybe share your experience with how that went for you? That was last year, wasn't it, that you tried that?
Yeah, and I think it was last year. I think I went to a recycler and got about 30 or 40 beer cans. I forgot I needed to make a quarter wavelength, and it took about 38 cans, and it was a nightmare stringing those. I used the aluminum tape. Unfortunately, the outside of the beer can is painted. It's actually coated, so it won't conduct beer can to beer can. So you actually have to I used a Dremel tool, and had to remove the clear coats.
It became quite a project for him, and it was taking a lot of time, wasn't it,
Yeah,
Kurt?
because of the clear coat
forever.
The clear coat, there's clear coat on the can, so you have to remove that if you want conduction. So it took probably a week to get about 25 of them put together, and
then the dog get into them.
Then my dog went chasing the mailman and stepped on about 15 of them. So I said I give up on this one. So, and then Allan told me it had already been done. So
Well,
Yeah,
But it shouldn't stop you, right? So,
no, absolutely not. I'll try it again.
yeah.
But I wanted it. It's not a beer can antenna. It is an adult beverage antenna.
there you go.
Any others?
Oh man,
Well, I think maybe that's all the questions we
that's
have
a
for tonight.
thank you, Alan, for putting that together.
Oh, sure thing.
We've been looking forward to this. We've been kicking around it. And by the way, if anybody is wondering, when Alan mentioned the FCC, that's a joke we've been having on run our group in the morning that meets around 5:30, 6 o'clock in the morning on the Blind Hams Network. We call ourselves the FCC. That stands for the First Cup Crew. We figured we solve more problems than the real FCC does.
So
We
there's
do.
a recurring question coming in the chat. They want to know Kurt's call.
His call is KR0LEX.
Alrighty, and that was mentioned earlier, but I keep seeing the question pop up, so I figured I'd
Oh, no,
voice it.
thanks.
So,
And I,
hey, Alan,
I-
real quick, you had mentioned that you've done other presentations. Do you have a YouTube channel or something like that that
No,
goes to
I
these
don't.
presentations?
And people keep asking me when I'm going to get a YouTube channel, and honestly, I just don't have the time. My day job really keeps me busy, and it's something I've been asked, but I have not pursued it. And because I know if I ever did, I would go down that rabbit hole. I've already gone down the rabbit hole of ham radio in the last almost 3 years now, and it's been a great ride. I've really enjoyed it. I especially like HF, but I do a lot of other things with digital modes and various things. I'm an engineer. I like to tinker with stuff, and I know if I started down the YouTube road, I would just get sucked in. But
Yeah.
who knows? Maybe one day. And I'm not retired. I mean, I work full time as a flight test engineer. So
Are there clubs that you've given presentations for that
yes, there
maybe
are. Yeah.
so maybe you
So
can give out some of their websites
yeah.
if you happen
Well,
to know them
I
offhand?
don't think only one of the club has them on the website, and I don't even think they're all there. But I belong to 3 clubs here in town, and the one that I do the presentations at for the most part is the Newton Amateur Radio Club in Newton, Kansas. And you can find their website if you just go and look on Google for Newton ARC, Newton Amateur Radio Club. And there are a few of my presentations on there, but they're not all there. And I've, if anybody would like me to give one of these, I'm, quite happy to do it. I have some presentations on some other topics as well, other than just these antennas, but these are my sort of my labor of love, and it's something that it's just fun to see what I can, what can I get to radiate a signal, and it's quite amazing. And I'm not the only one. There's a station in Ohio that does this, and he was sort of my inspiration when I started building some of these wackier antennas, and he does all kinds of stuff. He did a water antenna way before I ever did, but they're fun to do, and I'm always willing to if someone wants me to give one of these presentations, I'm happy to do it.
Okay.
And also real quick, Julian, in the show notes of the podcast and YouTube, I want to have a link to the LDG Unun, and also have a link to the ladder that you can get it. You can get them at Lowe's, Home Depot. Harbor
Yeah.
Freight just happens to have them on sale for $109. So I'll put a
Yeah.
link to that in the show notes for you.
And the cheaper the better, right? You don't have to. None of these devices have to, the most expensive thing on the market. It just needs to be a metal ladder. It'll work, and anything will radiate, right? So I have some projects coming up in the future if I ever can find the time. And one of them it'll absolutely blow your mind, but I'm not going to tell what that one is. But there's a few other ones, and at some point I'll probably have a presentation on the baseball backstop antenna, which was a fun one that Kurt and I did together.
All right. Well, certainly keep us in mind for those. And I
Oh, yeah.
assume, Alan, you're good in QRZ if somebody wants to get in
Yeah,
contact with you.
absolutely. Yeah, my QRZ email address, which is really weird. It's a CompuServe address, but I've had it for probably the better part of almost 40 years now.
Wow,
But
that's
yep,
going
you
way
can
back.
contact me. Well, yeah, it's from like the 1980s. But before they had alphanumeric email addresses, so it's kind of it has my old CompuServe ID. It's like 72604.3451. But I've kept it around, right? I used to use it as a kind of an email where I wasn't worried about spam, but pretty much anymore I've kept it, and it doesn't cost me anything. So
there you
yeah,
go.
feel free to contact me. You can find me on QRZ, and there's a little bit of explanation about sort of what I do and some things on there too. I probably need to improve my webpage there, but there's an interesting flight test picture of me flight testing of an airplane with a very large cargo door on it for the Bank of Mexico on there.
Oh, neat. Okay, well, this has certainly been a very interesting presentation. I want to thank you along with everybody else here for coming and giving us this presentation. I'm certainly looking forward to hearing about that other one that you talked about. So when you decide to do it, certainly keep us in mind. All right. Well, thank you, Alan, for coming. I want to thank everybody else who joined us here as well, and for those listening at home. Again, remember the Blind Hams website, www.blindhams.com. Remember the YouTube channel, CQ Blind Hams. And, keep checking us out and keep coming back. So on behalf of the crew and myself, 7-3 to all.
7-3.
7-3.
Audio now unmuted.
Hey, is the Al guy still here?
Yeah, I'm still here. Go ahead, Mike.